festivities, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure, as it has a number of occasions in the past, to welcome our friends from the United States Air Force Honor Guard. And they will come forth and present the American flag, and then we will have the American national anthem. The U.S. Air Force Honor Guard. Please be seated. Thank you so much for coming to open up this special week, and we have provided each of you a program. We hope you'll be with us the entire week. You're welcome to all of our programs with our keynote speakers, our panels, our workshops, our sports events, as we celebrate this great democracy in the United States and in Canada, and no one has a greater friend in America than our friends to the north from Canada. I would like for a photo opportunity, if you would particularly welcome our Canadian friends to the north, and our photographers are here and our videos here, and why don't we take just a moment to wave those beautiful flags from Canada and the United States and say, welcome to everyone. Thank you for such cooperation. I know that warms everyone's heart. If you'll be so kind at the end of the program today, the pins you got are your gift, and the flags, if you'll put those in the basket as you leave, we'll use those again, particularly at our banquet on Friday evening. It is a pleasure to have two presidents with us, actually three presidents, excuse me, Dr. Olscamp. We have three presidents on stage today. First of all, I would like to introduce someone who is totally committed to this institution and to all the students, and it's through the student government that we are able to fund the Popcorn Forum now for 34 years. To give a welcome, I would like to introduce the president of our Associated Students, Joel Crane.
goes to the chairperson of this committee and also the committee itself of the Popcorn Forum, Tony Stewart and the Popcorn Forum. So if we could all give them a round of applause, please. I'm going to keep my comments brief today. But I do have one statement that I do want to make to you. I believe that all the time that we spend investing in celebrating human rights will, in our future, pay us back in time that we will not have to spend in violating human rights. And I think that you all are making a great investment of your time here today and throughout this week. I encourage you all to continue to come to these events. You'll learn a whole lot. I know I will. I'll be participating with you, and it's going to be very exciting. I'm really happy about that. But that's all that I have to say at this point in time. I hope that you all enjoy your time that you spend here for the Popcorn Forum. Thank you.
Another group that is so cooperative with our institution and we work together in a collaborative way is among many other groups, is the Coeur d'Alene Area Chamber of Commerce, and the Commodores are here today. And to welcome our guests from Canada, I would like to invite forth Chuck Anderson, please, from the Commodores.
Welcome. As Chairman of the Board of the Coeur d'Alene Area Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to welcome all our friends from the north and enjoy our beautiful city. The Commodores, some of those you see over there in the blue jackets, every year we are the ambassadors for the chamber. We take our float to different venues across the northwest of Canada. This June we'll be in Cranbrook for Sam Steele Days. We'll be in Kelowna in July, and in the beautiful city of Penticton in August for the Beach Festival. Again, welcome. Enjoy our beautiful city.
Thank you, Chuck. Now I'd like to introduce the president of North Idaho College, and very distinguished president and very supportive of all the things that we do, including the lecture series. He will also welcome all of you, and then he will introduce the keynote speaker for today that we're honored to have with us. At this time, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Michael Burke, the president of Idaho College.
Thank you, Tony. Good morning. Good morning. I don't know about you, but I've been waiting for this day all semester. This is my favorite week of the year. On behalf of the faculty and staff of North Idaho College, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our 34th annual Popcorn Forum and Convocation Series Symposium entitled Celebrating Canadian American Friendship. You know, that bears repeating. This is our 34th annual Popcorn Forum. I suspect that North Idaho College may be the only community college in America that can boast a 30-plus year history of celebrating the human spirit. This week is an accomplishment. It is a labor of love by a lot of the folks that you probably won't see behind the scenes making it happen, but it's something I think we can all be proud of as a community of scholars, of teachers, and learners. For those of you who are experiencing your first Popcorn Forum, I recommend you buckle your seatbelts and put your trays in the upright and locked position. You're about to experience an unparalleled slate of keynote speakers and workshops that are drawing on the best and brightest educators and community leaders and student leaders, not just in the Northwest, but also in Canada for the first time. You're going to hear speakers on the unique Canadian American experience, an experience to me that is exemplified by the two nations sharing an longest undefended border in the world. You will hear through the course of this week from Dr. Paul Olscamp, the President Emeritus of Western Washington University, on the unique Canadian American experience. You'll also hear from Dr. Barton Barber of Boise State University, who will speak on the legacy of Indian people in the Northwest as well as in Canada. You'll have a chance to meet turn-of-the-century characters, I guess is the best way to describe them. They'll be appearing from Fort Steele in a rare appearance here in the United States. They're coming here from Cranbrook, British Columbia. And you also hear from some unique historical characters from Fort Sherman, which is the frontier fort that evolved to become your very own college on the lake. And you'll have a chance to enjoy a musical tribute to Canadian-American relations, composed and directed by two NIC faculty, our very own Gerard Mathis and Terry Jones. This year we'll also be featuring several panel discussions on prejudice reduction and something I'm kind of intrigued by, the evolving status of student government and student life on college campuses in the region and in Canada. As you sit there, you may be wondering, how did we get here today, 34 years later, to the Popcorn Forum? Who makes all this happen? Well, first of all, an enormous amount of credit goes to the founding members of the NIC community 34 years ago who began the Popcorn Forum. Some of us were in college back then. I remember it distinctly. It was not the best of times. The fabric of our nation was threatened. Yet those founding members of NIC 34 years ago chose to focus their energies instead on the great issues, the values and the ideals that have shaped our collective national history. So this entire week is really part of that journey, that 34-year journey through the ideas and the ideals that have shaped our country. And I hope each of you leave here this week enriched by this experience. Secondly, we are here today thanks to a number of folks that have been working behind the scenes all week to make this marvelous event possible. It was spring break week, and I saw many, many folks wandering around campus planning this event, and they deserve our thanks. First and foremost, Tony Stewart. Tony? I did my best to tell Tony to go home this week. I saw him here every day, I believe, on campus, and I kept reminding him, it's spring break, Tony. Break. Never did. Never went home. I think he was here when I got here, and he was here when I left every day. Also want to thank the Popcorn Forum Committee. These folks get together every year and plan this event, as well as the NIC theater folks up there in the dark, and the Fine Arts Department, who are going to be working all week on the events. Also, the NIC video production crew back here will videotape all these events and make them part of our library and part of our archives. And there are countless volunteers from the faculty and staff and the students from both countries who are going to be here and giving freely of their time to make sure this event goes off perfectly. And together they make this extraordinary week possible, and we are in their debt. And if you wouldn't mind just showing those folks a round of applause. And again, buckle your seatbelts and enjoy the journey. It's my pleasure now to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Mr. Paul Olscamp, Dr. Paul Olscamp. He is the immediate president, past president, president emeritus of Western Washington University, but he was born in Montreal, Canada. He is a U.S. citizen. He lives here in Coeur d'Alene. He holds a bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Western Ontario, as well as a PhD from the University of Rochester. I have a long list of his academic and administrative accomplishments, and I'm just going to select a few of them to give you a flavor for his career. He was an associate professor at Ohio State University, as well as associate dean of the College of Humanities at Ohio State University. He was vice president for academic affairs and later dean of faculties and a professor of philosophy at Roosevelt University, and professor of philosophy and executive assistant to the chancellor and president of Syracuse University. And later was vice chancellor for student programs at Syracuse University. He has served as professor of philosophy and president of Western Washington University, and is now president emeritus of WWU. He also served as president and professor of philosophy at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio, where he continues to be president emeritus there as well. There's a long list of memberships and boards and service to academia. If I could hit some of the highlights. He's been American Council of Education member of the Commission on Academic Affairs, the American Association of State Colleges and Universities Board of Directors member. Selected awards include the Alfred J. Wright Award from Ohio State University, and he's chosen as one of Change Magazine's 100 Leaders in American Higher Education. This year, recently in 1994, the trustees of Bowling Green State University named a new 95,000 square foot classroom building and teleconferencing center on their campus after Dr. Olscamp Hall. Congratulations. And finally, he just recently published a book, Moral Leadership, Ethics, the College Presidency, and Trusteeship in 2003. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Olscamp.
Thank you. Look at that, I haven't said a word and they're all leaving. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Tony Stewart and the school for inviting me here to participate in the Popcorn Forum. This is a unique event. I've only been in town 2 years, and almost everybody I've met because of my wife, Ruth Pratt, who's sitting down there. And I think it was Ruth who first met Tony and told him, well, my husband knows all about that stuff, so why don't you get a hold of him? And that's how it happened. I am here to talk about the differences, or most of them, between Canada and the United States, because although we're here to celebrate the union, the cultural union, in a way, the geographical union of the two countries, it's not possible to fully understand one another unless we understand our differences as well as our similarities. And I'm here to talk primarily about the differences. I don't think that two nations anywhere in the world could be any closer than the United States and Canada are. And even though that's true, their populations have very, very different social, political, and moral attitudes about a lot of very, very important things. Some of those things include the following: gun control, policing and governmental authority, social obligations to our fellow citizens, medical care, racial attitudes, capital punishment, the acceptability of war and the conditions under which it can be undertaken, the treatment of Aboriginal peoples and minorities, the appropriate relationship between church and state, and many other areas. The differing attitudes in many cases have become enshrined in radically different national policies and in different forms and expectations of our federal governments. My people on my father's side are descended from a French lieutenant and his woman, I know, I read the book, who was stationed at Fortress Louisbourg in Nova Scotia in 1700, the first French fort in North America. The lieutenant's descendants spread to Quebec. There's a town named Olscamp, which is the French pronunciation of my name, and there's also a lake with that name. But the majority of them stayed in the Maritimes, principally in New Brunswick. They were very poor, but hardworking and very proper. My father was one of 13 children. My grandpa, who raised and tended Percheron workhorses for the local lumber mills, used to say that the freight train went by at 3 a.m. every morning, and what else was there to do at that time of the morning? Amazingly, my long-suffering grandmother lived to be 103 years old. I don't know how that happened. My mother's family are Scottish and English and came to what is now Long Island in 1631. They fled the United States for Canada during the Revolutionary War. These two groups from whom I am descended, the French and the English, especially the United Empire Loyalists who fled the American Revolution, were and remain the most influential population routes in Canada. The antecedents of both groups had been in Canada for some time before my families arrived. The French explorers arrived at the Indian villages of Hochelaga and Stadacona, now known as Montreal and Quebec City, with Jacques Cartier in 1534. The English had actually arrived first when an Italian navigator named John Cabot, who worked for the British, planted the flag, the Union Jack, on Nova Scotian soil in 1497. And the struggle over who would control Canada begins with these two. For some decades, not much happened in Canada. But in 1670, what is now the Hudson's Bay Company, the stores that you will see in Canadian cities now simply are called the Bay, but it used to be the Hudson's Bay Company. And that company was founded in 1670 in London by a couple of disgruntled French trappers named Grossellier and Radisson, upset with their taxes, of all things. Reminds me of a tea party. Together with several London businessmen. Originally, it was called the Company of Traders Trading into Prince Rupert's Land, and it's still alive and well. But at one time, this company was the sole authority for all of Canada, and what is now the United States, from Hudson's Bay and the Arctic Ocean in the north, to Montreal in the east, the Missouri and Mississippi drainage systems in the south, and the Oregon Territory, including the Columbia, Fraser, and Mackenzie River systems in the northwest and west. Its London corporate officers were the absolute dictators of a territory larger than all of Canada and one half the United States as it is today. The original basis of this company's fortunes and the reasons for its founding, and thus of the exploration initially of this vast region, was hats. That's right, hats. In particular, men's top hats made from beaver felt, which were a craze in Europe for a century and a half, and the fur for which could only be found over here. Even prior to the period 1670 to 1725, French coureurs de bois and voyageurs explored the Great Lakes, went down the Mississippi and reached the mouth of the Missouri, and explored most of the continent from Montreal to the far west. Apparently, they were often very lonely. I'm sure that most of you have heard or seen the Grand Teton Mountains in Wyoming. Anybody know the meaning of Grand Teton in French? Well, never mind, I'll leave you to look it up. I was born and raised and largely educated in Canada, and like every Canadian child, then and now, I was bombarded by American culture, even if I didn't realize what it was. In high school, we learned the capitals of every U.S. state, population figures, the general history of the country, the differences in our forms of government, the issues and causes of the U.S. Revolution and the Civil War, the impact these had on Canada, and so forth. But Americans knew nothing about us and could care less. In high school, I went to Fordham University as part of our debating team, and a New York girl asked me where I was from. I knew she wouldn't have a clue where Sudbury was, so I said Toronto. She then asked me if that was anywhere near Ontario. Americans sort of assumed we were like a really big state where one went on summer vacations. The only distinctively Canadian radio program I can even remember was Hockey Night in Canada with Foster Hewitt. Elizabeth's grandfather, Connie Smythe, then owned the Toronto Maple Leafs, and my father knew him. What a small world, Elizabeth. Elizabeth will be speaking to you tomorrow. I think it's tomorrow, right? But I do recall, even though if that's only Hockey Night in Canada is the only Canadian program I could recall, I recall the Bob Hope Show, the Green Hornet, Fibber McGee and Molly, Lux Radio Theater, Dick Tracy, Boston Blackie, and Amos and Andy, clearly and with affection. I was astounded when it was revealed in the 1960s that Amos and Andy were both white guys. Wow. Have Gun, Will Travel, and Gunsmoke, along with Ed Sullivan, were my early TV fare. It hasn't changed much today, except that many of the singers and actors working in the U.S. are Canadians. Canada brags about that, forgetting that to make it, they had to leave. This ongoing cultural invasion, as Canadian nationalists call it, is the reason for Canadian content laws governing publications, television, and radio in Canada. Here, it would be called censorship, and it would be ruled by the courts as unconstitutional violations of the First Amendment. It says something about the fear that Canada has of being smothered by this giant to the south. When I was 14 years old, the only black people I'd ever seen were walking around the streets of Niagara Falls and Detroit when I visited family members there. I'd never personally, at the age of 14, never personally met a black person or woman, man or woman. I had no comprehension of the nature of racial relationships in the United States, and I thought Canada didn't have such problems. I had a very morally superior attitude about it all. I was positive I would never treat a person of another race differently just because of that. It's interesting that as Canada has absorbed more blacks, particularly Jamaicans, but also Americans and Native Africans, friction has arisen in Canada's major cities, and one no longer hears the holier-than-thou moralistic pronouncements that one did in the past. Similar feelings of moral superiority about the American mistreatment of Chinese so-called coolie labor on the part of Canadians died out when it was realized that they did the same thing, and that the Chinese could not immigrate to either country for many decades based purely upon their race. And of course, Canada interred Japanese in the West in the Second World War, as well as the United States, a fact that was not well known in Canada when I was growing up. Interestingly, however, interracial violence in Canadian cities has not appreciably risen as racial numbers have increased. Many attribute this to the history of respect for law and order and gun control. Good order has always been more important in Canada than personal liberty. Although Canada did not officially become a nation until 1867, when the British North America Act created the Canadian Confederation, its real birth came about on 3 earlier dates: 1763, 1774, and 1776. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris ended the French and Indian Wars against the British and gave the Brits control of Canada. The English, under General James Wolfe, had defeated the French at the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. The French fought under General Montcalm. Both Wolfe and Montcalm were killed during that battle. There were not very many English people, other than some traders and trappers in the West at that time, and they were mostly of Scottish background. But then came the huge influx from the South when the United Empire Loyalists, English who remained loyal to George III, fled the Revolution and swarmed into Canada. The entire population of Canada at that time was less than 200,000 people. There were almost 70,000 United Empire Loyalists who came north to avoid the Revolution. Canada was born as not America, and it defines itself to this day under that rubric. 199 of every 200 Canadians lives within 100 miles of the US border. Essentially, Canada, from a population viewpoint, is a country 5,000 miles wide and 200 miles deep. In addition to the group versus individual mentality fostered by the French and United Empire Loyalists' reactions to the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, and other factors, this geographical population distribution is a part of the explanation for the popularity of socialism in Canada. With the numerically small population to begin with, especially more than a century ago, but still only 30 million today, about the population of California, in a country larger than the US, but mostly uninhabitable for meteorological and geographic reasons, it was not possible to build a transnational railway, the Canadian Pacific Railway, whose building, by the way, was supervised by an American, Henry Van Horn, after whom a street is named in every significant Canadian city. And that railroad, by the way, the CPR, has now been privatized. Nor in modern times was it possible to build a national airline, Air Canada, now bankrupt and being purchased by an American consortium. The collective versus individual mentality is also the explanation for Canada's healthcare system, influenced by England's, of course, and for the first viable socialist party in North America, the Canadian Cooperative Commonwealth Confederation, or CCF, now called the New Democratic Party. When I was 18, somebody came to the door and asked if I was old enough to vote. The voting age was 21, but I said yes just to see what would happen, and sure enough, my name turned up on the voting lists. I voted CCF, the only vote I ever cast in Canada. And years later, when I became a Churchill buff, I learned of his comment that if you weren't a socialist in your 20s, you were heartless, but if you're not a conservative by your 40s, you're brainless. I have no further comment on that remark. The Parti Québécois, whose initial popularity was not just because it wanted to secede, but because it was socialist and strongly supportive of unions against the then Conservative Party in Quebec, also stems from this group versus the individual root. The group or collective has always had preference in Canadian law and culture, above and beyond that of the rights of the individual. Among other things, this explains why unions have always been much more popular in Canada than in the United States, why there is national health insurance, and why, on a per capita basis, government is much larger and taxes much higher in Canada. There are no property rights in the 1982 Canadian Constitution and Bill of Rights, and governmental condemnation of private property is much easier in Canada than it is here. Generally, Canada's higher taxes